thankful for the way these stories hold on to the lifetime we won't get back. I know these rivers carry on. People tend to stick to you after time. Places tend to do the same as we do. This river carries on and on.
Hello and welcome to Kankakee Podcast, where we talk about the people and places of Kankakee County. I'm Jake Lamore, and before we get to today's main topic of discussion with Jack Klasey of the Kankakee County Museum, we're going to hear another Kankakee Community College success story.
Hello, I'm Jessica Friedericks, the Professor of Education at KCC. At KCC, I am in charge of curriculum and instruction decisions regarding all the courses related to becoming a teacher in the state of Illinois. When I was in high school, I loved history and I wanted to be an archaeologist. I actually was scheduled to attend North Central College in Naperville on a scholarship, academic scholarship, to become an archaeologist and anthropologist. And then life happened and I was not able to attend the university due to financial reasons. So I decided to go to KCC. I was so glad that I could stay and live at home with my parents and really think about what I wanted to do. Maybe I would have gone to university, but I don't know. It's tough to say. I was just so grateful. It definitely reduced my stress level when I was able to stay home, take classes, and there were wonderful professors here at the time. Many have retired, but some of them were just so instrumental in helping me kind of down that path. I'm so grateful that I had that option. I was able to graduate from undergraduate without any student loan debt because it was so affordable and scholarships were available, and so it was just a great overall experience for me. A former high school counselor gave me an idea once. He said, I think you'd be a really good teacher. And at the moment, I was like, absolutely not. But then I started thinking about it a little bit more, and I was like, well, I do like working with people. I love when I help someone understand a new idea or teach them a new skill, and it makes them have that eureka moment. So then I switched gears, and I started going down the road towards being a high school teacher, which I actually ended up being a high school teacher. So I was a high school social studies teacher at Herscher, and then an opportunity came available at KCC to be an administrator. And so I took the leap of faith. It was very scary because I loved being a teacher in the K through 12 age range, but I just knew if I didn't leave, I would never leave. So I jumped, and I have been here since 2006. I was hired to train teachers about our online course management system, what at the time was called Angel. We now have Canvas. And I would lead training sessions, small group, large group, one-on-one. I was in charge of training everybody on campus to learn how to use the phone or Microsoft Office Suite or the room scheduling software or the Scantron machine or whatever they would throw at me. I would just have to learn it and then teach it. And then one of the former vice presidents during our interview process, my interview process, noticed one of my future goals when she asked me, where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years? I said, well, I would like to train future teachers how to teach. So I said, I know I probably won't be able to do that here, but I had visions of going to ISU because that's where my undergrad degree is from, or somewhere, and becoming part of their curriculum department, instruction department. And she remembered that. And after, I think it was 2.5 years, I was asked to be the first professor of education at KCC. And I was like, it was the greatest day. I was so excited probably cried. I was so excited. And I've held that position since then, so August of 2009, and it's been wonderful. So many of our former students are now teachers in the area, so I've been able to build that kind of relationship with them. So when I need students out in the field, I can just email or Facebook message someone and say, do you mind having one of my students in your classroom this year? And they're like, sure, send them over. I have so much love for KCC. It's almost like I want it to succeed so badly. And I proudly wear my KCC stocking cap. There's so many great people that work here and have worked here over the years. It's just like a package. Like it's not just one thing. It's like this all-encompassing thing. And it's been a huge part of my life. It really set me in the right direction for what I needed to do and where I needed to go. And I just want to give that to all the students that come through my door. I'm like paying it forward, I guess, to make sure that they have the best opportunities for them, and that when they're done, they can smile and feel good about themselves as they move forward.
You can help create a KCC success story like the one you heard today by giving a gift to the Kankakee Community College Foundation. Give now at foundation.kcc.edu. And now we'll get to today's episode with Jack Klasey of the Kankakee County Museum, talking about Gougar's Grove. It's great to have you here, Jack. And for those that happen to be listening to this episode before the end of 2022, we encourage everyone to go to the Kankakee County Museum to see the gallery of trees. It's one of the most beautiful things you'll ever see because all these different non-for-profit organizations in the county get together and they spend a lot of time decorating these Christmas trees. It's our version of, let's say, the science and industries.
Christmas around the world, I think is what they used to call it. I don't know if they still do.
Yeah, it's pretty much Kankakee County's version of that. Instead of Christmas around the world, it's Christmas around Kankakee County pretty much because all of these organizations are from different parts of the county. So go check those out. Bring the kids, go around the whole museum.
We actually attract several thousand visitors every December for this, and that's plus the introductory dinner that opens up the event is our biggest fundraiser of the year, so we always appreciate it. We happily take donations, of course.
Yes, right. We encourage everyone to donate what you can to the museum because there is quite a bit of overhead, older buildings and things like that. So roof repairs, I know, has been a thing as of recent at the museum. So
just one idea is the main museum itself has 7 different furnaces.
Yeah.
Of varying ages. So occasionally it seems like every once in a while we have to replace another furnace.
Because there's so many additions to the original building that's there. I know another thing that was unveiled earlier this fall was the new mural in the courtyard.
Yes.
It's beautiful. Who did that mural?
Diana Crowley, who is our curator, collections person, and so forth. And she has an art background. She actually used to teach art and came to work for us as a curator and came up with the idea that we really needed an attractive mural in that courtyard off the Centennial Room, which is where everybody comes into the museum. And she did a fantastic job.
Yeah, she did. I didn't know it was her.
Yes.
I've been wondering this whole time who it was, and I didn't know it was Diana. She's an amazing artist.
Yes.
So let's get to today's topic, Jack. What are we talking about?
We are talking about the man who essentially was Kankakee's tourist industry for about a 30 to 40 year span. His name was William T. Gougar, known around town basically as Captain Billy, mainly because he ran a fleet of excursion steamers up and down the river. He also had a large picnic grove out toward Aroma Park, and we'll touch on all those topics. But Captain Gougar, we've talked, currently tourism has been in the news around here with one way or another. And essentially in the late 1880s or mid-1880s through about 1915, as I say, Captain Billy and his enterprises were essentially the tourist industry in Kankakee. Brought thousands of people here. He was born in Will County in 1841. Anybody who's familiar with Joliet area in Will County knows there's a Gougar Road there, and that was his family.
I was wondering that. That's the first, literally when you brought up Gougar's Grove before, that's the first thing that came to my mind, because I have been on Gougar Road a billion times over the years, and I always wondered if there was a connection. So there is a connection.
Yeah, his family farmed there.
Okay.
And he came to Kankakee in 1863. So he would have been a young man in his 20s.
Yeah.
Initially, he got into the grain business, I think, buying and selling grain, and then later was a coal man, had a coal yard and so forth. Both quite successful businesses, but
Coal yard, just selling coal to people?
Yeah.
So the coal would come in from a coal mine?
The mines, right, and he would sell it to householders and so forth, because coal was the primary heating source during most of those days before natural gas and electric came in.
People are picking up their coal from him, or maybe he's delivering it to their houses,
Right.
probably, right?
Yeah.
A horse and buggy, I imagine, just like ice.
Yes, that's
delivering
right.
the ice.
Yeah, it was a different economy from what we're used to.
Yes. Oh, yes.
No internet, among others.
No phone.
No phones.
No phones
well,
quite
actually,
yet.
after by the late 1880s, 1890s, we had telephones here.
So he came here in the 1860s.
Right, in 1863, basically. And it took him, maybe about 20 years before he got into the tourism business, actually. I think his other two businesses compelled his attention for about 20 years. But in the middle of 1883, he bought a 22-acre plot along the river about halfway between Kankakee and Roma Park, which was called Waldron at that time. Eventually, that grew to about 80 acres. It was a pretty good-sized operation. And he started developing that as a picnic grove. Picnic groves, or resorts in some cases, were very big at that time because a lot of families and a lot of organizations would like to get out in the country and, spread out and have all kinds of picnic activities and so forth. And so that's where he started. And in that same year, there was another item of news that would eventually become important to tourism and to Gougar. James Lilly, who was the contractor building the state hospital. But anyway, James Lilly built a small steamer, 72 feet, I think, long by 12 wide, built and launched it from the state hospital grounds, and it was a side paddle steamer. And it was a workboat as far as what he built it for. It would go upriver to Roma Park area, up along the Iroquois, and pick up barges of sand that were being used in construction of the state hospital. So it would tow them down and so forth and go back for more.
They would need sand for what? Concrete or mortar?
Yes, mortar and so forth, yeah, because it was mostly stone buildings. Their foundations were...
Most of those original buildings are limestone,
the native limestone from this area, yeah. Beautiful stuff.
Oh, yes. Yeah, definitely. And it was plentiful because there was tons of limestone quarries around the area.
Oh, yeah,
and there still is, but probably not as many as
there were, yeah.
Yeah.
And so Lilly named the boat the Starry Queen for some reason, no one knows why.
It's kind of funny you name a workboat the Starry Queen.
Then somewhere later on, I think toward the end of the summer of 1883, he renamed it the Minnie Lilly. And I assume Minnie was a member of his family somewhere. I don't know precisely, but was in honor of somebody in the family, I'm sure. I haven't got a precise date, but sometime in 1884, probably in the late spring or early summer, Billy Gougar became the owner of the Minnie Lilly. And we don't have any documentation, but this local legend says that he won it in a poker game from James Lilly.
Oh, I love those stories. So he put...
I'll see you at raise you two and your boat, or something.
Yeah. I just imagine this smoky back room somewhere in Kankakee, and you've got all these prominent businessmen getting together for their weekly poker game,
right.
Smoking cigars, drinking brandy.
That's right.
And they've got everything on the table at this point, and they're like, you know what? I'm going to put my steamboat up for bid here as collateral.
That's right. So therefore, in 1884, William Gougar actually became Captain Billy at that point because he had a boat. And the Minnie Lilly was his primary boat for about 15, 20 years, I think. I'll pin it down later. But it was a side-wheel steamer, had paddle wheels on both sides, and I think they were like 8 feet in diameter or something like that, and it could hold several hundred people. He based it down at what is now, would be underneath the Schuyler Avenue Bridge right now, at the foot of Schuyler. The Schuyler Bridge was not built until the mid-1950s, but in the 1880s, when Gougar was running his boats, there was a place called Shakey's Landing, or Shakey's, Shekeys, landing at what would be the foot of Schuyler Avenue. Between there and the IC tracks was a large sawmill. It was Wenzelman's sawmill, probably the same Wenzelman family that's been in Kankakee County for years.
Okay.
People desirous of having a boat ride would come down to Shakey's Landing and climb aboard, and he did regular runs up and down the river, primarily, of course, obviously to Gougar's Grove, which he was busy developing. As time went on, as I mentioned, he was kind of the tourism business in Kankakee. He did a lot of excursion business. In those days, especially out of Chicago and urban areas, people wanted to get out in the country, get out from under the smoke and ugly conditions sometimes of the cities and spend some time in the country with fresh air and all that sort of thing, and good beer and things of that sort.
Yeah, as we've mentioned in previous episodes, the 1800s, Chicago is just a pollution mess from so many different things, especially the slaughterhouses.
Right.
It's just stinky, smelly, and smoggy.
Just burning all that coal.
Yeah.
Too. That's what everybody was burning, coal at the time.
Yeah.
And I think it was probably a soft coal, which is really smoky.
Oh, yeah.
There would be excursions. It might be, 50 people. It might be 300 people would come down on the IC or the Big Four, the New York Central line. And then there were carriages that ran from both depots down to Shakey's Landing, and people would climb aboard, and he would ring his bell, and off they would go.
And that's perfect right there where Shakey's Landing was, because in the grand scheme of things, that's not that far from the Kankakee train depot, right?
Right.
Where a lot of these people...
Yeah, the IC depot had only been like 6 blocks away, I think. Yeah. And the Big Four depot was at Cypress and Fifth Avenue, roughly in that area. So that's not that far either.
A little further, but still not far, yeah.
That's right.
It was, one fee for all your transportation from Chicago all
Generally,
the way to Kankakee, and then that would cover your steamboat ride on Captain Billy's boat.
Yeah, right. And they're usually what were called excursion rates, which are a cut rate kind of thing if you were booking 200 people at a time or whatever. Interesting sidelight. Just about 2 weeks ago, I think, the column that I ran at the Journal that touches on this. The anchor of Gougar's boat, and we're not sure whether it was the Minnie Lilly or the Margaret. We're kind of thinking, we know for sure we have a picture where you can kind of make it out on the bow of the Margaret in one picture. But a several 100-pound anchor had quite a story. In the 60s, it was stolen as a college prank. It used to sit out in front of the museum.
Oh, really? The Kankakee County Museum?
Yes,
the anchor did?
Yeah.
How big was that anchor?
It's about 3 feet long, weighs more than 100 pounds. It's pretty substantial. A bunch of college kids stole it as a prank, and it ended up in a fraternity house in Denver for some reason. And eventually the guy who was the ringleader of the
fraternity
or of the anchor stealers anyway, moved on somewhere. But somebody who was in Denver, he wasn't a student, but he had some connection with Kankakee, originally from here, I think. Somehow he learned of that, and that at one point that the fraternity house was going to be torn down and they were going to scrap it because it remained behind, even though the guy who stole it had moved on.
Sure.
So this fellow, who remains nameless, although he did a good thing rather than a bad thing, acquired the anchor, and it followed him around all kinds of places for, heavens, ever since the late 60s or mid to late 60s. He lived in Denver. He lived in other places in Colorado. He was lived in Hawaii for a number of years, and the anchor went along with him.
Oh, my gosh.
Eventually, he came back to California, and it was in California up until August of last year. August of this year. There's a family in town that were related to this gentleman who kind of talked him into saying, look, it ought to come back to the Kankakee County Museum. And this family's asked to be anonymous but one of the members of it wrote this charming, really interesting narrative of the travels of the anchor, told from the anchor standpoint. And
that's funny.
It is. And in October,
we should publish that as a little book or something.
I did the whole text of it in my column.
Oh, did you? Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
And in October, the anchor came home to Kankakee Museum, and it's now a prominent part of our Kankakee exhibit, our main exhibit on the story of Kankakee County, resting next to a couple of models of Gougar steamboats, which it used to ride around on.
There's so many different things at the museum. I guess I've never paid attention to the anchor or thought about it or until now. But now I want to go back to the museum just to see this anchor.
Yeah. You know where the paddle wheel is there?
Yeah.
And the model of the hotel sitting right in front of
right there,
right next to the paddle wheel.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of cool.
I mean, the fact that you got the anchor back after the 1960s?
Yes.
It's a long time ago.
It's a long time to be wandering around, and the story is just really cool that this family wrote, and it's a fun sidelight of local history.
Yeah.
And I was amazed. I had some photos of the Margaret underway in the river, at one day, and when we were doing this, and I thought, I'm going to see if I can find it, because normally an anchor of that type would be carried on the bow of the boat. And I said, I'm going to see if I can see any indication of it. So I took the photo into Photoshop and just started blowing it up. And by golly, I found it. You could see it was a little obscured by the railing and so forth, but you could definitely see one of the tines or the anchor parts and a part of the shaft. And so that we definitely established that was an anchor that could have been there and probably was.
Yeah, but we're just not sure which steamboat.
Which steamboat, yeah. I don't know whether it was, it began life with the Minnie and then later went to the Margaret or not. Mm-hmm. Because the Minnie Lilly only lasted until 1889. From 1884 to 1889, the Minnie Lilly, and then part of that time a smaller steamboat called the Modoc, were basically Gougar's fleet. In the winter, they were moored on the bank of the Kankakee River at the mouth of Baker Creek.
Where's Baker?
Baker Creek, if you come down Waldron Road from Kankakee and just past Grace Baptist Church, there's a bridge there, there's a little waterway.
Yes.
That's Baker Creek.
Okay.
Apparently, one of the boats was hit by lightning in November and caught fire, of course, and the fire spread to the other one, and they were totally destroyed. And so there was a lot of concern whether, was Captain Billy going to continue his business, build a new boat, or was he just going to give up and say, get there by road, that sort of thing. Debated for a while, but in February of 1898, the newspapers carried stories that work has begun on a new boat for Captain Gougar. It took, I guess, about 6 months, maybe roughly, to build this boat. It was, and this was a stern steam wheeler, a stern wheeler instead of a side, which I think is a little more powerful. And I think the wheel in this case is about 12 feet in diameter, but I'm not quite sure. I remember seeing that number. We have a wonderful series of photographs in our collection of the construction of that boat.
Oh, that's cool.
There's probably a dozen or more that see it from the time they laid the keel till after they had the hull complete and they decked it over and had the engines in place and so forth. They launched the boat without its second story and the pilot house and so forth, just to do trial runs and make sure
everything
worked right.
everything was was working and watertight and
exactly.
all that. Did they build that locally then,
built
Margaret?
Right down at Cheeky's Landing.
Oh, wow. Who was the person that built it then?
There was a veteran boat builder from Chicago, I believe. I even have his name someplace, but he was apparently quite well known. They brought him down here to build it. And the keel was a large white oak piece of timber that had been cut, I think, right across the river somewhere, or up maybe toward Limestone somewhere.
Plenty of trees around.
Plenty of trees around at that time.
Yeah.
And so by...
and you got a sawmill right across the way?
Sawmill right next door, which was very good. Yeah, on 25th of July, 1898, the Margaret went in service. Captain Gougar christened and launched it. And originally he was going to call, I think he said he was going to call it the something or other gentleman, or the partying gentleman or something like that. But then he decided to call it the Margaret, which apparently was his sister's name. He and his sister never married, and they lived on River, 202 River Street, which is probably right about River and Dearborn, and she was his housekeeper and so forth. So apparently that was the Margaret. We've also seen variations of the spelling of the name, and I'm not sure, sometimes M-A-R-G-A-R-E-T and sometimes I-T. You can see the name label on one of the pictures of the boat, and it was E.T. So the I.T. probably slipped in as a typographical error and some story early on about it.
Probably. So he just built the one boat then, and I'm guessing the Margaret that was built was a lot bigger than the other two?
Yeah, it was, I believe, something like 85 feet or so long and 60 feet wide. Or
just from the picture you recently, the picture you recently sent me, it just looks enormous.
Yeah, it had a capacity, it had 2 decks, and it had a capacity of about 400 passengers.
Oh, yeah, that's big.
And for most of the year, as long as the river was free of ice and there was business to be had at Gougar's Grove, the boats ran, I think, usually several trips a day, because they would leave Cheeky's Landing and head upstream all the way to Gougar's Grove, unload, reload passengers coming back. And I think sometimes in busy seasons, maybe on an hourly or every other hourly basis, it was not that long a voyage. I think it's about 4 miles from one to the other.
Yeah, so that's not that bad.
Gougar's Grove was basically outdoor. There were tents and cabins for rent and so forth. So winter weather would not work out very well there.
So whatever happened to Margaret then?
It slightly outlived Gougar. It went out of service in 1915 because by about that period of time, the excursion business had kind of died out. Automobiles were becoming popular. People would go out and drive out to the country on their own instead of going on an excursion by train and boat and so forth.
They have a private excursion instead of a public one.
Exactly. And so generally it kind of dwindled down. It was not so busy, and he tied it up again at the Breaker Creek, where he, for some reason, that was upstream of his or downstream of Gougar's Grove. So, and I think he retired at the end of the 1915 season. And by a year later, when he died in November of 1916, I believe. The newspaper commented that the boat was decaying; it was falling apart. Not if there was ever anything other. The bell, I believe, the bell from that is in the museum collection.
Oh, we do have the bell. Is there anything else from Margaret?
Not really. Just, I say, we have a couple of models of the Margaret and the Minnie Lilly that were made by avid model builders in town. They're quite impressive. They have a lot of detail and so forth. I'm not sure if we have anything else, but I know that for sure we have the anchor back, of course, and I'm quite sure we have the bell, the ship's bell.
So let's talk more about what was Gougar's, the actual grove, like, since we've kind of talked about the steamboat.
Okay, I think maybe
boats, I should say.
First I'm going to insert a midway stop on the Captain Gougar's voyages. From 1887 until 1897, the Hotel Riverview, which is what is now Cobb Park, was the intermediate stop on his excursions. It had been built as quite an elegant hotel owned by Emery Cobb and Illinois Central and the Big Four railroads. And they did a lot, talking about excursions. They would bring whole excursion trains or people down on excursions and would come to the Hotel Riverview and have a big time and so forth. And they would ride Gougar steamboats back and forth. Unfortunately, in 1897, the tall 3-story wooden hotel burned down and was never rebuilt. It was it would have been right at near the entrance of Cobb Park, basically. Gougar, during that same period, was very active, in addition to his tourism business, as a politically and civic activities. He was postmaster of Kankakee for a short period. Yeah, he spent 18 years on the county board and 21 years on the city council in Kankakee, apparently at the same time, because they would have run out of years somewhere in there.
Wow, yeah. You couldn't do that this day and age.
I don't think you could manage it, no.
Well, I don't think that would be allowed to be on both the city council and the county board.
I think legally you could be.
Really? You could?
So. Mm-hmm.
I
think so.
Didn't think they would allow that this day and age. That'd be
we'd have to consult the state's attorney and see sometime.
I would be curious to know if you could sit as an alderman and also on the county board
as a supervisor.
Yeah, to me that would be a conflict of interest, but
they're both elected positions.
They are both elected positions.
He also was a member of the Kankakee School Board at various times. In 1892, he was appointed mayor of Kankakee when P.J. Kelly, the incumbent, died, and he finished out his term. I don't think he ran for re-election, but so he was very active, and of course, he would have encountered Cobb and Lilly and all the other
guys.
Local business people, prominent people, all probably belonged to the same clubs and hung around the same places and so forth.
Obviously, they played poker together.
I think so. Yes, that's right. Selling a riverboat.
Yeah, my gosh.
But anyway, Gougar's Grove was amazing. It was wooded, and of course, if you go out along Waldron Road today and between Baker Creek and Aroma Park, all that stretches along between there and the river are all nicely wooded, and they have a lot of really fine homes. There are different subdivisions like Old Orchard and Island View and so forth.
So, present day now, where would Gougar's Grove have been then? Is it developed, or is it still just wooded? And
it's all subdivided. It's subdivisions, yeah.
Okay, so what are the subdivisions?
Okay, this basically north of, and I've forgotten the name of the suburb, but north of Island View, which roughly, if you know where the little section of Forest Preserve right on Waldron Road, to the west of there, between there and the river. And as I said, he had about 80 acres. I'm not quite sure how far north he went. He did not go all the way to Baker Creek, but when it was fully developed, it had a lot of things going on. For example, there was a clubhouse, which was a 2-story wooden structure, very nice. It actually was sort of a small hotel or a rooming house kind of thing, where you could rent rooms because people would go not just for a day, like day trippers, like many of the excursionists were. People would also spend a week or sometimes even a month there. At Gougar's Grove. The clubhouse was one type of accommodation. There also were cabins and tents that you could rent for varying periods. They also would, and I'm not sure exactly how this handled, but I think for those who were in the tents and so forth that were dealing with were able to do their own cooking and so forth over, open fire, I guess. They made arrangements for groceries to be delivered from the Kankakee grocery stores and so forth to there. You could order them. And I would guess that in the clubhouse there was probably a meal service of some sort.
I'm sure there was a kitchen. Yeah, there had to be. Mm-hmm. There had to be a kitchen for those people.
And there was there were a lot of things to do there also.
So I would imagine swimming.
Oh yeah, there was a sand beach with a bathhouse for people to change and so forth.
Now, did he probably? There's not naturally sand there, right? He would have had to haul in sand.
Yeah, he would
right?
hauled in. Yeah, because that's a mud bank there. If you've ever been along the river in that area, it's kind of depending on where you are, it's fairly sharply dropping off, and it's tree roots and mud.
Yeah. Okay.
But so you had a sand beach, and there was also a water slide, or not a large slide. You could slide down and splash into the water. You called it the chutes.
And you mentioned the pony rides, right?
Pony rides, yes. And there were, you could rent canoes and rowboats and do your own voyaging on the river if you wanted to.
I saw that toboggan, right? Where they had toboggans?
Talking about a toboggan slide, but I think that was probably the water slide thing.
Oh, okay. Because I remember the advertisement you sent me.
Yes,
I could have swore it said toboggan.
It did say toboggan, and I'm not sure where that fit in because... if there was anything going on in the wintertime, it might have been ice skating,
Okay, but, if
there was no real elevation for a toboggan. It was nothing like Helgeson Park.
Right. Did they offer hunting, maybe?
I don't think so there. No? They did have a shooting gallery, and a bowling alley.
They had a bowling alley out there. That's impressive.
And a merry-go-round. And one of the other larger structures on the grounds was a dance pavilion. A 60 by 80 feet dance pavilion, and they brought in orchestras or local bands and orchestras played there on a regular basis. It was pretty interesting.
Yeah, it cracked me up how in that advertisement right next to the dance floor or whatever, it put the dimensions, and that's on the advertisement. And to me, that's just seems kind of funny because I don't know if you see that this day and age. Like you just put we have a dance floor. I don't know if they necessarily put in the advertisement. It's exactly this big.
That's right. Another attraction at Gougar's Grove was something called the Marquette tree. I don't know if you ever heard anything about it. This was a huge, probably 400-year-old oak tree. It was massive. The trunk probably was maybe 6 feet across, and it was just huge. Anyway, local legend, and I'm not sure when the legend started, was that Père Marquette, Father Jacques Marquette, who was Jesuit missionary and explorer and man who determined the course of the Mississippi River, where it was heading south in 1672, which is a long time ago. Supposedly, at that time, people heading for the Mississippi River or back toward what was the site of Chicago would come up the Illinois River and make a portage across a very marshy, difficult area of several miles from the Des Plaines River, which was part of the Illinois, to the Chicago River. And it was a terrible portage and had, just really strange. Supposedly, after Marquette founded some missions near Utica, Illinois, on the Illinois River, he became ill, and his crew said, we got to take him back to St. Ignace up at the north end of Michigan, Lake Michigan, or what's now the state of Michigan, which was kind of the headquarters for explorers and so forth. Supposedly, instead of going up the Illinois, the Des Plaines, and making this arduous Chicago portage, or Mud Lake portage as it was called, they went the other way. Instead of going up the Des Plaines, they came up the Kankakee. And then, because there's a relatively short and a lot less complicated portage just near South Bend, Indiana, where you can go at the headwaters of the Kankakee and you portage across to the St. Joseph River, and then you can get to Lake Michigan, which is where they wanted to go.
That's where, they didn't want to go. They didn't need to go through Chicago.
That's right.
Yeah. So there's a specific tree that apparently Marquette.
Yes, supposedly they camped under that one night on the journey northward to save the missionary from the more arduous passage through Mud Lake. And so, again,
a local legend.
Local legend says, yes.
How can you possibly have proof
Yeah, because I don't think there were any diaries or anything that said that. But anyway, it does.
That would be the only way, right? That would be the only way you would have any type of evidence. It would have to be a Marquette diary or someone that was with Marquette.
The Jesuit Relations, which were these collections of diaries from and reports from the various missionaries. But I don't think it was always kind of questionable.
Yeah.
They may have gone up the other way anyway, but
some people create local legends like that to just get people to go check out things, right? So
might have been Captain Billy.
I was just going to say that something Captain Billy invented, or anyone a part of his business maybe came up with,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, and I know for sure he certainly gave it prominence. He built a iron fence, a wrought iron fence. It's like
Around the
6.5
tree?
feet. Yeah, square one, probably, 12 feet on each side, and put some benches so that people could come and sit in the shade of the marquette tree and so forth. One picture we have, in fact, shows two nuns sitting
Under the tree?
on the bench under the tree. Yes.
Oh, yeah. I bet the nuns loved that tree.
I think so. Yeah, with the Marquette connection.
Yep.
It outlasted Cap'n Billy quite a while, in fact, and Gougar's Grove. Gougar's Grove, I think, sort of petered out somewhere after Gougar had died.
So, yeah, after Captain Gougar died, did someone buy or take on, or, well, no, he didn't have any kids. That's
No, he
right.
didn't have any children. No, I think his estate sold the property, and which became then subdivisions over the years. It's very interesting.
So it would have been after the 20s that maybe they started building houses
Oh, yeah,
there?
I think so. But back to the Marquette tree, big windstorm on November 6th, 1934, blew the tree over. And we have some photographs of the trunk after a lot of the limbs have been cut off because they were cutting it up for firewood. But you can see a section of the fence still standing upright on one side, but if you look under the trunk, there's this mangled section of fence, very definitely part of the fence. So it took down at least one side, maybe two sides of it. My journal column for Christmas weekend has an interesting story about the mystery of the Marquette tree. That whole story will be in the journal on the 24th.
Okay, cool. Well,
And,
it's always good to have something to look forward to.
Yeah. Well, okay, another relation to the Gougar's Grove. I don't know if you ever heard of the Chautauqua assemblies.
Yes, we briefly talked about those. I think it was when we talked about...
Hotel Riverview, I think. Or
No, it was Electric Park.
That's right, Electric Park.
We touched on those. Yeah,
That's
so
right.
just briefly for anyone that hasn't listened to that episode yet, what is a Chautauqua?
Yeah. Chautauqua movement started in the state of New York, and in fact, I think the town of Chautauqua, New York. And what it was kind of a cultural uplift kind of movement, sort of a summer camp. They ran about 10 days, week to 10 days in various locations, various towns that they found a sponsor. And they would normally be outdoors under a big tent, or if possible. And there were motivational speakers, for example, and there were discussions, there were literary discussions, musical events, all kinds of uplifting, interesting kind of things. And it was really something to do and drew pretty good-sized crowds. And from from 1901 to 1915, the Chautauqua in Kankakee was held at Gougar's Grove under a big white tent. Had some pretty interesting speakers. William Jennings Bryan, who was, of course, a very prominent politician in the late 1800s, unsuccessful presidential candidate, and so forth. Carrie Nation, who was a temperance crusader, went around, trying to destroy bars and taverns and so forth.
Part of probably Prohibition then, too.
Yes. Earlier than Prohibition, but leading up to it.
Leading up to it, yeah.
And then Helen Keller, the inspirational woman who was blind, of course, and was a very prominent and revered figure in society at that time. And there is a marker a number of years ago, quite a few years ago, 1950s or 60s, I believe. Martin Vanderkar, who was the township road commissioner in Roma Township, took on a project to put out historical signs in various places around Roma Township that marked the sites of various things. For example, there's one up right as Waldron Road turns and heads into the village. There's a sign that was the Rakestraw Cabin was the first school in Kankakee County.
Oh, wow.
In the 1830s or somewhere, maybe late 1820s. And I think a lot of the signs are gone now, but there was one on the first post office that was up by Mount Langham. But there is still a Gougar's Grove sign on Waldron Road on the right-hand side. It's not real prominent, but it's there. This looks a little different from the ones that Merton did, so somebody may have redone it. But there were a lot of them around. It's too bad that they didn't survive.
I'm going to have to go for a drive and see if I can find them.
Yeah, it'd be on the right-hand side before you get to the Island View subdivision.
Okay.
So it's pretty interesting.
That is very interesting.
So it'd be really nice if somebody had the wherewithal and the interest in building maybe a half-size replica of the Minnie or the Margaret and running river excursions again. I don't know if that would ever come about. that would tie in real nice with the riverfront project.
Rock. Yeah, the river walk.
Maybe we ought to talk to Bill Yonka and see if he'd do that.
I was just going to say, I'm going to talk to Bill about that and see if we can get get Minnie Lilly or Margaret back on the water.
There is one sort of excursion boat operating on the river in the summertime.
Yeah,
at the Bradley House.
Yeah, does that guy, what's his name?
I can't remember his name.
But does he still do his pontoon boat excursions?
I'm not up to date on that, but I think he was, or whether the COVID thing which threw everything off.
Yeah.
I know Bradley House was finally back this year to full operation again, but for 2 years everything was kind of down the tubes. I think I've seen a sign out front there, but whether that's still current or not, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll have to find out. That's a good thing to keep in mind. I'll have to find out about that soon.
No, I think I've kind of run out of topic.
Yeah, I think we covered
information on this topic anyway.
Yeah, I think we covered a good chunk of it. So just to remind people again, if you're listening to this episode before the end of the year, the Gallery of Trees is up until probably the 30th, I think.
Yes, 30th, yeah.
December 30th.
I don't think we're open on New Year's Eve.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think the museum is open on New Year's Eve, but you go check out the Gallery of Trees, and there's over 25 trees, or it's about 25 different Christmas trees.
I think so, yeah, 25 to 30, but I think, yes.
Somewhere in there, all spread throughout the Kankakee County Museum. If you want to get more information about the hours or anything museum-related, you always go to KankakeeCountyMuseum.com, Facebook, and Instagram. Those are both at Kankakee County Museum, and there's always
old-fashioned telephone call.
Old-fashioned telephone,
932-5279, if I remember correctly.
Okay, so yeah, there's plenty of different ways to contact the museum, and of course, always be on the lookout for Jack Klasey's weekly column in the Daily Journal every Saturday.
Every Saturday, every weekend edition.
Yes. And
also every issue of the Lifestyles magazine.
Yes, you always have an interesting
one
piece
story in there too.
And that's every
2 months.
Every other month, right?
Yes.
Every other month there's a new edition
of
Lifestyles.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's a great local magazine that is always well put together by Taylor, Ledden, and the entire Daily Journal staff.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, so that covers it. Jack, it's always an honor. So thank you for doing this.
It's always a pleasure to be here and have somebody who's willing to listen to me.
Oh, absolutely. My ears are always open for you, Jack. So you always have the best stories.
Well, thank you, sir.
That concludes this episode of Kankakee Podcast. I'm Jake Lamore. Thank you so much for listening. I should also mention there is a unedited extended version of this episode available to our monthly patrons. To unlock this version, go to KankakeePodcast.com, click on the Patron tab, and even if you can't pledge $20 a month to hear the extended versions of episodes and can only pledge $1 a month, please do so. It goes a long way, and your pledge is truly appreciated. I'd like to thank our current patrons for helping make today's episode possible, which includes Karen Bishop, Jake Lee, Jesse Arsenault, Dave Barron, Daryl Damper, Samantha Rocknowski, John Sullivan, Lake Iverson, Travis Garcia, Jane Bostwick, Dawn Harrison, Simon Topless, Scott Wright, Carrie O'Connell, Jamie Race, Joanne Barry, Anthony Vicelli, Eric Olson, Carl Earps, Jeff and Rosa Carroll, Teague Dreenan, Sandy and Steve Twait, and Rose Lucky. Again, click on the Patron tab at KankakeePodcast.com, and if you want to make a monthly pledge to help keep the podcast going, please do so. I can't thank you enough for your support. And if you ever want to reach out to me with any questions, you can always connect with me on Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn at Kankakee Podcast. Our theme song was written and performed by Lupe Carroll and recorded by Daniel Bishop.
This river carries